Tadi Sarah.
Tadi san.
Oh, yeah. What it, when there is a man with song, I think, Sarah, she also talked back with certain dogs and had a measure, but from the Raya La Chasalo. Oh, yeah. Tomadoa. Simjian Tamjigi. Tando. Oh, Janica, sorry. Junko say, and they couldn't dengue. Sanjay Kovarum was a chin at the top of the chas. They cheto. And Mondulami Kovato take it up. And it, they tendo. Jimbe Midatung Tontamilla Soba come the quality tarbet. To any Rajibu call it tabeta maimba. Simje Tamjija. Koyatungele Tower chasam. They cheto. Tandarala. Tungele Tower Chiben, never yours soba maybe. And then never yours soba drink was a yunde. Tanda long door in net, Tamjam Maluba Changenge. Tumba Sanjay Chumden de Tabu. Sanjay Kovanji Chinet Tower chasam. They cheto on it, ambition again, Sambe. Gunu set and the Semper shoes, all this soon did.
So first, we should think, setting a motivation, that for the welfare of all sentient beings, I must attain the state of Buddhahood in which I've removed all faults and gained all good qualities in order to be able to actually benefit sentient beings. And so for that purpose, we are striving to attain in the future a higher rebirth as a human or a god for the purpose of being able to continue our practice. And then we meditate on things like impermanence and selflessness and so forth in order to get out of this cycle of samsara. But our own liberation alone, seeing that that is inadequate, and we don't just want to liberate ourselves, but also all other sentient beings, we then recognize that at this point we don't have the ability to really truly benefit other beings. And therefore we need to strive for the state of Buddhahood in which we know incontrovertibly, without any sort of fallacy, all of the points of what are to be adopted and what is to be abandoned. And so for that purpose, for striving for that goal, I'm going to listen to these teachings in order to be able to actualize that state.
Oh, yeah. Oh, the tongue of the Drossard the Timba. Oh, Ninji comes to the Drossa. Oh, that and that. Ninji come to Nabdunga Jus. Simjet Tamje. Tungeda Tower Jujis. Some Tangi or the Shipsi Tower. There is a lot chang the Kungu Amara. Then the lot chang ne. Come go on to Shavina. No Tambo Nijina. Sosogi. Pamanian de la Soba, one Namjungazo. Marsis Mala Soba Tendel Combudoa. Say Mayena. Tinchishu de Chita Masonza Marsis Tine. Conguorton. Diana. Yanga Shilia. Ma Sunjukan Mavcha de Yang Pada. And then Yandan Yedula Soba. Ran Kegela Soba Ran Kare Cheba Yuna. Oh, Tene got to Nitambu got to Goyara. To make energy Samlutan. And taking it a trainer Nyamdo. Samlutan Goyara. And take the Tambusos Ninjichone. Namine has the got some good one. Namjungazo Ninji come Chamba come Tangyum come se. Come Bashe you are there. So with treating it, converting Namjuna City Agdoa. Tangone lo Chango in it, Tambu the Sosu. Namine Namju ditches a Pama near the Sazana Sitinen go to Godoa. Oh, take the go to the area. Ninji come here. Sendele Kangi to Tungeda. And then let them move Shamache. Toma Mebane Kwa Site go to the Samata. Ninji come Godoa. Oh, Tene. Any range Chita. Tanyum Rand and Draw man get in the pass. Come. That's one that social Namiche. Nambu. Nada rather do ditches. Leguina, Sogbaina, Tina, Nambu, Georges at Azulacom. At the Nepatane, Chitan Miller, Tanyum, Chitan meeting Delia, Randa, Cabo Mer to Wool Merwas, Jiba the Majiba and Job and Gang Chitan Miorwa, or Tezolia, Nijicom. Tozu Kankali Kashelia, Kashe do it in the Shekode Yomara. Katisonja, Tesu Sosu, Pamadan Drawa, Joa Mambolia, Sendi Pamadan Drawa, Nyan to the Drawa Cheo Resam, Tante Kichi Penamashi, but some remato, and it changed Jambanda Resam. Oh, Parmesan Gento to Sosu, Namidanya Batsawa Kumgua. Oh, this is the trust and the Kashel trusted Kandan Sosu Kasani said, Makasap in the Yona. Transmission this American Sunju Kandan Kadu in a Samutane, Mesitina Tos Makasat, Choyana, Tisamutako, Trasitera. She was a tragedy mate. Oh, Jenny. Oh, there's some Samutane, oh, Tilly, Tarsone, Tende Megachi at the Tirongi Maresam. Tian sent the Pamata, Niente the Chibakiamanam, Sitting the chair of Padamata, yet and Nito, but Chibakari, she didn't have a curiosum. So I told the Tarzans, Dragmarism, Chibaches, City, Pamaniente, the Chibatsawa, Levachagoda, to when the Chadu saw Levachagoda. Oh, the days of come. And some Jatamja Paruchilia, Tawadula Tunga Meduba Simja Yinchinja. And it, Thomas Samje, this summer, Tunga the China, some long Angaki. Oh, today, Lodi Amachi. Rally ship the chip Pucci was it, Pucci was it. That did not sound as she was to which Sona. Takacha was some condition, the Taros and Tunga de la Taros and some Zawayora. Or teach her some J. Simjan Sangmala, so soon them you chili, you get a chili maggot, Tonga, the Kanga Suletena, Tunga the China, some Zawangangi, did not soon by Shikesona. And it's Ninja Chambos and getting minked over there. Ninja Chambuda, combat said the long barrier songdua, or this was on the sheds as on a tissue unit. No.
So here, last time we had been talking about the way of meditating on compassion. And so we want to generate this kind of compassion here is a compassion for all sentient beings. And so the way that we go about sort of getting to this, I mean, often we say, wouldn't it be nice if all sentient beings were freed from suffering? But when we really get into meditating on this in particular and actually training our mind, we do so by sort of focusing on individuals and expanding outward our sense of compassion. So we could sort of get to this by first, we can take those that we are close to in this life, those that we recognize as being our mothers and fathers, friends, relatives, those that we feel closest to. And so the sort of kindness that they have shown us, we recognize as being greatest because they've shown it to us in this life. But recalling that kind of kindness, we recognize that then all sentient beings have acted in that capacity as our mothers. So we begin by really looking at those that we are close to and sort of recognizing and thinking about the way that they suffer, the kinds of different kinds of sufferings that they are afflicted with due to being under the control of their karma and afflictions and so forth. And we begin by thinking about that suffering and wishing to relieve that kind of suffering. So this thought begins with those that are sort of around us, that we feel a closeness to, because it's easier for us to generate that desire for them to be free from their sufferings. And then we sort of expand out to looking at those that aren't particularly close to us. We may have no relationship with those particular individuals, have not had any sort of connection or interaction with them, but we recognize that in the past they have acted just the same as our dear mothers and fathers, those that we are close to, those that have shown us great kindness. And so recognizing that they have acted that way in previous lives, we sort of equalize the feeling of compassion toward our loved ones and relatives with that we have toward those that we have no connection with in the present life. And then we move on to trying to equalize this feeling of compassion or extend the feeling of compassion to those that are our enemies. And here when we say enemy, it doesn't have to be someone that we really have like some sort of deep-seated argument or something with, but there are those people where maybe since we were young, we just don't like them. We just have a feeling of kind of natural dislike toward a person. This is the kind of individual that we want to take and recognize that it's not suitable to hold them with this kind of dislike dislike or hostility, hold them as an enemy, but rather they have acted again as our mothers, as our fathers, as those that have shown us great kindness in previous lives. And so again, all beings are equal in their desire to be free from suffering and their desire to have happiness. This is something innate to all of us. And so we are all equal in that way. And when we get to the point where we are able to regard all sentient beings in the way that a mother regards her dear child, when a mother really cares about a precious child, anytime they're suffering, she wants to immediately get rid of that suffering. When we are able to have that kind of feeling of wanting to relieve the suffering of all sentient beings in the way a mother wants to relieve the suffering of her child, this is the kind of measure of having generated this kind of compassion.
No, yeah. Tangan zu dine da karsore. Tere chamba komba ne singeswa odine marda. Chamba komba ne se. Tani ji konje tan de shesara ta chamba kometre. Chamba komba ne zashe gi chola tomar shene se. Tambo de soso zashe chendelia soso kare cheba yona tire. Pamata nyen de la sasan la sobadwa. Ane ke shinjin la soba sosolia. Labsatwangi teacher taking la soba to the sula chesu in a tinashin till tambu samutanje, tinashin comgora. Oh, Chamba combanet Zashigi chola Tomar Chenes, Soso Kasha Nisatel Tambu, Tawada Trena, Yambe Chamba Comsera. Tene Chenes, Tawada Trend Travel Debe number days, Chamba Tandakarisina, Tawada Trendu Chamba Terese. Rimgi Tameba, Dechelia, Chidang Melia Chamba Comsera. Tagina Shirwa, Tambu Sosu Nindi to Sulcom, Anthony Chidang me round and draw me gangi, Mitasuliatini Chamba Comse. This also Nindi the Chibak Chess and the Chamba Combat Chetu Chisigora. Chamba Com. Dechelia, Rimbi Tameba, the Chidang Milsigora. Randa Yagoda Dua can draw me again to Sigora, and one machine get to Sigora. Rimbi Tame Badase, Tichelia Tezo Nyambaji Sosu, Nini to the Nyambaji Jipa, Tada, the Chamba come to Sona Sigurdo, and the Trado the Sosu Magasa Chiana, Ra, Megasa Man and any Oshirako, Megasa Chiana, Nimayina, and Kadina, and Megasa China, or Tele. Inta Chamba Comgora, Coletason Yake Homare, Kichipu Homa Shimbamado, Tandarangi, Chamba Comsaga, Geshe Yeshi Thabkhe, Koki Eche or Samche, any Chamba Comgora, Tinyamba Johnson, any Chamba Chenisati, Simje Tamjelangi Jubatin Gora. Oh, what did you call it? Madana.
So then we pick up from the meditation on loving kindness. And again, here we begin with friends and people you are fond of. So this feeling of those that we are close to, our parents, our relatives, our teachers, those who have shown us kindness, those that we feel a kind of fondness toward, we wish that they might meet with happiness, that they might have happiness. And so this kind of meditation on love begins with those that we feel close to, and we extend that then to those that are strangers, those that we have no particular relationship either with, either good or bad, and we try to see them as the same as those that we feel close to, have that same kind of feeling of love, of wishing that they have happiness, as we do for those that we feel a great deal of affection for, like our parents and teachers and those who have shown us kindness. And then we extend this out to our enemies, or those that are, again, people that we just don't like, maybe. It's best if we don't have anyone that's sort of in that category of enemy, but we should recognize that it's not suitable, it's not right to to hold them as being an enemy, because they have shown us a great deal of kindness in the past. It's just a matter of not recognizing it. So when we gradually have then extended this out, we are able to generate this kind of, continuing in the text, it says, habituating yourself with compassion, you will gradually generate a spontaneous wish to liberate all sentient beings. So when we have this kind of natural occurring sense of wanting all sentient beings to have happiness, that's the measure of generating this kind of loving kindness.
Oh yeah, doing Sarah. Oh yeah, oh Tati, the teacher Hakuna Yakudwa. Nambunga zo marche basse. Tunde menga tunji kone simkitu za marche bas tambu marche kumgyoba. Tene ten chambas, marche be nega so ten chambas. Any ten soas, tilen chandulo. Any young chambas, the kumgyora, tene ninji chamba kumgyoba. Oh, tindu. Tatanda delia marche bada. Ten chamba da ten soas, loga ke shake medua. Yine tatia, sende Pamala soba nye to majurwa me seduza, Pamala soba rala cheba conditioner, the shegdoa, Marsheba the shegdoa, and the dig cheba chan tandangazo, Kabuche, the social cheba jang yosa, Digwa, Tinshin Bujang yosa, Tinashi, Mashi Tinde, Tilenje Gure oh, Tini, Pamanashi Shanda Chibbares, and the Shedu Kotanda left the auto. Marsheba da Parsheba Niendo Sheba la Soba. And it Chamba Chinsoa. Oh, teacher, young Chamba says Tadinganzo, Tanim Comsaduza, Tanim Combecheso Chambe Chilemba Sidoswa, the young Chamba Telcora. Namju young Chamba de Nele, Niji Chambingelo Dogora, go to Chegora. Koyedo Ombuch Mana, now and Robuch Mana, Cola and the Tunga Samlatana, Tender Glochig Marwa. Ram Mega Sachina, Kutunga Nata Samlitana, Tanda Yabucho, some Telemanga, some Yangayora, or Tindico Casura. Young Chambatingel Mana, and a Tungagin Nazu Samna Tunga the Tended Losuk Chambuchig Marwa. Tindico Young Chamba Chambe Chilean Bas, young Chambadora. Oh, Tene, and in Yinchimbutan the Sherwa. That under the Shed, Tawada Tended Chambasigora. Tawada Tendo di Chambada Ninji Chambonite, Kundation in Jimmy Doko Yakayomare. Tisonjako, Ninji Chambuchesa, Tongeda Tena, some Chimarunyambe, Lochesarwa, and it Tawadan Dena, some Nandroyana, Mina, Dakatita, and it Tarbe Dawala Sowa, Tawadan Dena, some Tawadan Tendo di Chambata Sheriora, or teaching Lotsona, yeah.
So here, it's important to know we have in the sevenfold cause and effect method, or 6 causes and 1 effect method, we have this first step of recognizing all sentient beings as having acted as our mother, having been our mothers and fathers, acted in that way, and then recalling their kindness, and then followed by the wish to repay that kindness. And then that is followed by kind of having an attitude of loving kindness towards sentient beings. So here in this text, we're not specifically going into those details of those 3 steps of recognizing all beings as our mothers, recalling their kindness, and wishing to repay that kindness. But the meaning arrives in the sort of contemplation that occurs here, because we recognize that there isn't a single being who hasn't acted in the past as our mother, hasn't shown us kindness, and therefore all sentient beings are the same in that way. This comes up in the meditation on equanimity. And so we get to the point then of this, as we saw, we begin the sort of stages of meditation as they are listed here with equanimity, followed by moistening the ground with loving kindness, because we have to have this sense of like affection towards sentient beings in order to wish that they be freed from their suffering. If we are still holding some beings as being like an object of our hostility or dislike, not only may we not want them to be freed from their suffering, but we may be, say, happy if their suffering continues. So we absolutely need to get rid of this kind of feeling of dislike towards certain beings and sort of extra liking towards some, and instead have that equanimity followed by a kind of sense of affection for beings. Once we have that affection, loving kindness toward them, we can then generate the kind of compassion that really wishes to free them from their suffering. And so the order then of compassion as the wish to free beings from their suffering, and love, the wish that they have happiness, is sort of, it could go in either way, but it all follows on that foundation of equanimity followed by a kind of loving kindness, which is a sense of sort of affection toward beings that then leads us into the wish to free them from their suffering and the wish that they have happiness.
Oh yeah, tan de soye de karso namjunga Dombares dana simje tamje tawada tevejo dan dembajo tunga de trawa chu samge wara dongi wara ne chidare samluta mado one tane namju te sa do chiba chinyara tawadan dana samje tunga de trena sa khol tuwa chu samja ke tengi medwa namju nang shi de chi ko re mado tende chene de go mar songe wara simje tamje tawada so nangmi nyende tene chene kondu nashi tawada tewe judan temba pa miki kane re samlo kogara ngarajo namji chidan simje tamje tawada so namji desa deli jari jasa jab kondu desa te tunge chung sam chawachena chawachego chawchen degira dige pendo medo ata dembe panyente yongura mato simje tamje si shenta chili be surache simje tamje tawada judan tunge so chi de na to tongye chuna chu samlo kondu te never ge semba megi ba so kuna semba megi ba so shagra o te de ma chi songu hara ngone chi ngone chule pendo skora so dan ji dondi chi setene che jani hango cham te che ko hara ti men ta stu shena namga tong ba ya sam de sule segresena ko semje tawadan dana se semje chi yo mare 동에 대해서 삼사 심지치로 말해. 이거라 세레 지나가 심지 탐지했을 때 삼다 소소 삼로라 요아를 진도네 뜻이 고요하다. 어디 손자 레레레네 코메데 개침불이 송고도와 지지 송나.
So we often, when we are, say, reciting prayers and we say, like, may all sentient beings be free from suffering, how wonderful it would be if they were free from suffering, and so forth, or we recite like the four immeasurables, we can't just sort of leave it at this level of thinking, oh, all sentient beings, as like this big generality that's kind of vague and out there. But while we then, as we go about our life and interact with those around us, we fight with them and we get angry at them, and we are sort of like engaging with them in bad ways. So thinking like, oh, it's okay if they suffer, but yet we sit down and we say like, oh, may all sentient beings, as if there's this sort of all sentient beings out there. But then when it comes to the individuals we're actually interacting with, we tend to still make them unhappy and get angry and all of these kinds of things. So it's really important here that we're talking about meditating on individuals, actually observing individuals and thinking about them and thinking about wishing they be free from suffering, wishing they have happiness, and not letting it just be this kind of vague, open, oh, may all sentient beings have happiness, may they all be free from suffering, without actually taking the time to individually work on generating these kinds of attitudes towards particular individuals and then widen it out to all sentient beings. Otherwise, there's the danger of sort of reciting these things in an abstract, but when it comes to our everyday interactions, we're not actually training our mind in this way.
Oh yeah, tandele lamri seminar tende songutwa. Oh, teacher shane ya wu chide. Oh, ngadu tanda delia. To simple pa tada nyenda parmata tada tende shane simple re komje. Ane komju chidwa chambada nyenchi da tangyum te sama. Oh, depe ke chimbu yin songwa do. Oh, tedara 당님다 잠바 니지 손부터 유소소소소 첸레레레레 첸네 고메 손바데 최응원배 너값을 송샤스 최응원배 너값을 송바데 너로베 까마실라게 공rin 리값 세브체네 송샤티 페페 쳔보데 송고도아 제바네 내 신도 체데스 내가 신도 쳔보데스로 근데 마고베는 시단지지 넘바마도 소소 원에 전에 심제질에 잠바자와 닝지 야부지 깨투고 말해서 근데 소소소소 체제 잠바이나 아니 지단 심제 탐제 심제 인도 졸에 삼로 깨투고래 레레레레 통도자에 잠바다 대화단 되는선 동에 맞추는 삼사게 삼로 강게 코르토 그래서 그다 근데 멤버즈 다와 심제 탐제 세다네 지 잠바니지 공부에 소르베질 소르 공부에나 지다 레레레레 따디자 심제 찔레 잠바니지 맹게 유레냐가 요르노 어때 손자티베 내가 심부레 송고도와 소소 체네 공바디네 내가 신도 심부레 송고도와 소소 마체와제 당분에 지단데지도 삼타데나 근데 잠바이나 인지 첨보다 땅님다 저지까지 끼기 위해서를 소소 심부레 초용을 해대 다심제 레레레네 심제 찔레네 게 야부지께와 용고 말을 쓴 거라 강라에 매기라 나라스 레레네 바 공부에나 와 레레네는 이 교를 심제 레레 털 공부자 일이야 교라께네 원에 바 인간기 쉽게 온 것도나 어쨌든 원에 야부지께서 끼기로 쓴 거라 교래 용왕을 쉐바다 떠네 아니 지만도 땅나세 심지어 마루라기 김지다라도 도디치사나 마루마르다 아니 지당하게 깨운 거래서 어떻게 심부레선 것도 나셰바다 떠네 지만도 땅데서 아니 심지어 잠바니 지담이 공사 마루 땅에 야다니 아니 찔레메네 장내 강걸 미토 그래 소소소소레 깨토 그래 어디 손자 대패 심부레선 것도 맨에 장나 속바다 소소 강라야 미자 남다 계획처럼 어떤데 저기는 지다 심지어 탐제선다 이제 잠바서 왕하게 깨토그래 심지어 레레레를 봐서물 단두자 잠바니 이제 왕하게 깨토그래 송구다 자티게 심부레 대간주 남지 떠나게 정말도 레레레레 소소 낭민 돈디 제선에체 다디만디 강님도 내가 제스티네 용거라 데메 퇴셔셔저 넘쳐 가와데게도 깨티시오 마라랄 카드 또게 용말도 오데 탈레만조샤 오데 디셰스토
So here, if this is emphasized in Je Lama Tsongkhapa's great stages of the path, the Lamrim Chenmo, where he talks about the importance of meditating on these individuals, taking them as our object of observation, an enemy, or those that are close to us, strangers, those that are sort of neutral and enemies and so forth. Because this is, it's a very important sort of description that comes out of sources, including like here in maleshila, where we are seeing that the sort of training of the mind begins by taking individuals as individuals and trying to generate this kind of desire that they be freed from suffering and wish that they have happiness. Because if we just sort of begin with this, like all sentient beings sort of category, we can't really generate this innate desire that will come up when we actually meet with individuals in real life. If we just sort of start from this going for all sentient beings, I mean, maybe we can generate some kind of a feeling when we are, say, reciting those prayers and thinking, oh, it would be wonderful if all sentient beings were free from suffering and if all sentient beings had happiness. But when we try to do it in that way and just have this category of, oh, all sentient beings, we don't actually generate this really transformative kind of innate love and compassion that comes up when we really focus on these individuals. So by focusing on, say, those that are close to you or those that are around you and really contemplating their suffering and wishing that they be freed from their suffering, we can then move sort of outward more and more to include, say, all sentient beings, including like sort of all those people in all directions that we haven't really met. But that's the way that we are able to transform our kind of actual interactions with beings when we train our mind in this way. So this use of meditating on the individual and going through the various individuals, each being, in order to generate a really strong sense of love and compassion is something that is very important. It's stressed in the Lamrim Chenmo as well, because otherwise we just sort of have this vague category of all sentient beings.
Oh yeah, that nation de lam show the Yaumetro. Geshe Poto Alia, Geshe Poto, Katambe Geshe Poto Alia. Any magic senator, Geshe Tupsus and magic mingra, or Katambe Geshe and that's injury. Or dig any knowledge church sorona, Tamachi sorona, shure. Or Tilandelia, or the church. Chua Medaba Mando come down so Tiran Chingebe, wondering at chewing neighbor, the Tawa Dega Mari, some Zalochkeba Yenasora, Chingebe Losikeba Yenasungura, and Chingebe Losichuayena, Tibapon la Cale Young Maris, Kewatuba la Cale Mebas Young Grace. They tend to Chamba the Ninja come down so Simjagi Tencheba la Kawa Mebas Young Grace on it. Tangarazun Namju Simja Rere Makumde. And the Tata Degre, Yang Degre, Cochajan, Cora Degre Mado, Kanekarla, and Maneta Degra. Tarere Mone Chambatsa Combahina, and the Simjay Chebala Kajumavashi Sora. Kiwachebata Kastanda Shekonako, Chetubiwada. Oh, Dijikuna.
Sikche Yankar Surona.
Ah.
Sikang Tamani di Yankar Surona.
Kasare. Ala. Oh, Geshe Poto Alia. Katambe Geshe Poto Alia. And then Mission Daji Church Sorona Ashira, Tamaji Sorona Ashira. Oh, that church is Chua Metaba Mando Comsora. To talk about it, Tangere Masamse. Nebado Chingere, and you must intend to gain some to Tonsungura. Chua Metaba Yana Ando Com, the Chingebe Losichunase. Tanga tend to mare, you must have dogere some lungange course on a sungora.
No.
Oh, any Casura, Tibapo la Caleke yo mare. Kewatuba la Cale yo mare, so Nangi Koraju do the sungora. Tit and do Chamba the Niji com sungora, Simja Chamba the Niji comda, and the Simjangi Tencheba la Cale Mabashim good. Tewada Trevata, Kangan Seata, Shanda Yabuyo, and the Tindelia check on the Cocash and Troshetone, Tirikuga in some time Jayungura, just the college yo Marisungara. No, this was that Chamba and so to the communication with Sunga.
So here too, I think this is important. There's a quotation from the great Kadampa Geshe Potawa, and he was asked by a student, Tuptul, that's the name of the student, for some advice, for some instructions. And so Potawa said to him, well, you should meditate on death and impermanence, and that will give rise to the understanding that death is definitely going to occur. That leads you to have no difficulty abandoning non-virtues. When you really have that sense that death is going to come about, there's no trouble, there's no difficulty in giving up our non-virtues and engaging in virtue. And then on that basis, meditate on love and compassion for individual beings. And by doing that, there will be no difficulty in working for the benefit of beings. So when one genuinely has a kind of love and compassion for other sentient beings, again, based upon this, generating it in relation to individuals, training the mind in relation to individuals, and then expanding that out, then there's no difficulty, there's no trouble in working for their benefit. So this is the kind of essential instructions that Potawa gave to this student, emphasizing the importance of meditating on love and compassion for individuals to then have no difficulty working for their benefit.
Oh, then I said, Kishenga was Kadambe Kishenga was Sungua. Chilchutam to do Shana. Any Shana, Chilchutam to do Shana Sungur, no. They sungin the Kishenga or da. Chilchutam Dona Nignal do rese. Shall never pon, shall never pon the Pemba Drubanignal do res or that. Never born Susan called Sawadirwa, Shantung the Jena, some Sawabound, Incident Gudwa, Shana Sawabamboda, Shana Pemba Trubas, there's a Pemba Trubet, Chamba de Yungora, or Tini Sunalia, Tenesum de la Soba, Tebachi Jungo, Samatam, to that Tini Sunal, Debere Songdoa, or Carsoda. Pemba Trubanis, Tenesum da Tebachi Jungo, Dotam Jetini Sutibaresa. That on that Chamba that's what is Kashambore Songora. Sure, Congress Jolly, and it's saw by a Tunga Shally appended to be a chinin or dudura. Or Tengi Chamba that was a shishun set Tinidora. Or Tin Rizako Tinipe, Kashambore Songdoa. That Chamba that saw the lambs shooting yams so land and lambdo yoala. And a Saba Kashambore, that is some the Pekasham Sungara. Saba manner. Pa never much and two never chable sober tamate yon secret and no quarter younger chamba that saw te marwa. Never kira. Just a word. Tingy lamb to long bala chamba that saw any yabochipa. So somebody sit on that debut tambach, debut young as a chebalia, and the sober cashambore somewhere. Sober manner part so teaches thoughts and namsa conduct and no lecture tata cheduda, and a coach chamba that said should. Lamlo Rotok Mara Chetok Mara Songda, or teaches Sunani Dira.
And then there is from the great Geshe Chengawa, another of these Kadampa masters, he says that if you condense all the dharmas, it can be sort of summarized in these two things: abandon harming others and benefit them. And so really, these two things condense all of the greater and lesser vehicles. They can be condensed into these two things, that abandoning harming others is really this attitude of compassion, of wanting to free them from their sufferings, of wanting to get rid of that suffering. And benefiting beings is really about the sense of love, of wanting them to have happiness. And so this is what he stressed as being the most important, is our getting rid of the kind of causes of suffering for others and generating an attitude of compassion, as well as working for their welfare and having this attitude of love. And in order to be able to actually put these into practice, he stressed the importance of having patience, because we need to have this kind of forbearance, the ability to put up with whatever may come and have those attitudes without, say, getting angry at others. In order to bring about a result from our practices of love and compassion, we have to have this kind of patience, training ourselves to not just react to things and respond in a negative way, but rather to be able to have the forbearance to put up with whatever may come and really stay grounded in our practice of love and compassion.
Oh, yeah. That do matter. Oh, that do. Chamba combatant Zashi Chola Tomar Comsungdo, Tomar Chenese. Tawada trend be number days, Tawada trend Chamba Comgore Sora. Rimji Tarba Rimji Tamebada Talaya Combasho, 20%. That Tedare Niji Combarishanes, or Tedar Chamba Yong Chambata, any Niji Combarishanes. Simja Tamja Tunga Chena, some Chichimaru Tower Saku, some Loshu Simbuchigora. Take care sonata. And a change of some day Kyongo. Ninja the change of some Tawayamba. Change some jetum jetunga that trend of some Lutanda, Tunga not to some Lutanda, Sosu Pamela Soberoi. Tunga the Tower Chago do some. Tunga the Tower Daga Chow Nabe. Tunga the Tower Chandu Loti Kyongura. Take care sonata Tunga the Tower Tanda Ranga Chetu Yomarto. Ra Koya Tunga not to Ran Pusum Sokbe Yomarto. In a Tandanga, the Tunga the Tower Chip and never yon so much your mother. Diana Chinu Kanuge. Tanda Tanda Tunga the Tower Chigi, Kanyo so Shelia Tunga the Tower Tapsi Chiata, Tawatoya Tapsi Kanyo Shed, and the Rimdi Tunga Rani Kirkuse Yandekunde, Sanji Kova Tobachene, Lando Gene Maluba Tarsim Bachenge, Rang. Tabji chane, Sambu chane, Tarchimba. Any Yamubada Shichiba, Kirkanga, Landor Guinea Tamja Shengachi Chebo do some. Techeto Chesonani, Samja Tamja, Lapsimbuchi to Ude, Samja, Chanju Sam Kigora. Tingan Namju Tarawa, Michi Sosu Mesitinala, Gala Kepsi, Lonju Yonga, Pusum Soba Yonga, Chegu, Samti, Gangi Yeva de Samtas, Tati, Tondalia, Lobson Checha, Tichi, Tumgengi, Lobson Yabuchi Chegu, Samje, Chetumge, Yandendi Yogoda, or Yandendi Yanani, or Tina, Shichibari, Tisam Diore, Samje Tamji Tondo, Sanji Kovan Tobar Chan, Yabani, Chanju, Samji Kivari, Songodoa.
So here then, again, on this meditation on love, we have this beginning with those that we feel fond of, and it has this nature of wishing that they meet with happiness. And then we gradually extend that meditation to include strangers and even your enemies. And habituating yourself with compassion, you will gradually generate a spontaneous wish to liberate all sentient beings. So here we have this kind of affectionate love, a sort of feeling of closeness to sentient beings and wishing that they might be freed from their suffering. And when that becomes sufficiently strong, there's this sense of, well, what can I do? How may I free them from their suffering? And so compassion, we know, is the root of this attitude of bodhicitta. And when we get to this point where we really are striving to do whatever we can to alleviate the suffering of sentient beings, we recognize that right now we don't have the kind of excellent qualities that allow us to be able to fully work for the welfare of others. And so we should think that, well, however much I'm able to, I'm going to strive to attain this state, the state of Buddhahood, wherein one has eliminated all faults and attained all good qualities, knows all of the points of what is to be adopted and what is to be abandoned, knows all of the ways to work for the benefit of sentient beings, is actually able to help extricate them from their sufferings. And so here we understand that we can bring about that kind of truly great benefit of other sentient beings by engaging in this kind of practice and path. And so there's sort of we undertake this striving for that kind of goal in the same way that we see worldly people when they say want to have a good career or get a lot of wealth, they're willing to undergo a great deal of difficulty striving to get certain qualities. And so we too, based upon seeing the kind of qualities of Buddhahood, seeing that they know without exception all of the points to be adopted and to be abandoned, have developed all qualities and eliminated all faults. That's the kind of state that we wish to achieve. And that's what spurs on our striving for that.
Oh yeah, that's the question you said. Simje tamje to the question and they couldn't give us a some Simje turn to a shidra, then never also saw a connector to a shid. Oh, the incident Akashi can do some era. Oh, Jama San gets on an Simje turn she in Samado, Tanda turn machine gets on the Tendeko Yamara. Simje tamje to Sanji Kovan Toba Chagin, Tandane, Chimbada, Chudimda, Sabada, Samdenda, Shirabda, Tezula Zungiara. Keva Mambo Gona, Chanju, Semkin, and Sanji Kovan Toba Chagin, some Semki Gordo. Nindu take care of the cousin as you were. Round the dade. Tandang of the da said to Suzuki, Mashiba to take on your Samutagra in the Mara. I may Kobana you do Rayora. Titale Rayora. Tinashi Tronsa Sonaya, Namshitiko, Quintin Dugora. Whereas the Shabju of Citizen John Hamago get a same and get a chagdua. Yanko sem tamu in a true search and dogdua. So what did I send me in Jawacha to the same tamu and Roshagora? Take Jawachimache. Take Jawane Jawalia Chimba Sutin Saba someday. Shantung the Jawata Shalet Tawato Beshit Bezusiane. Tendem Belurin Buchane. And a tarbe Tunge Tamja the Jawata Tawat and Demba Chetung the Tartu Bekibu. Landur Ginetam Musum to Shenge. Tuje come to somebody Palanya Kanga Chenge. Oh, Tendechi some Congiordo, Yantimado. Nimachi says you are. Number to Jima Sangi on the subject, she said, under subject, Chekumedu said to the Maro. Kadina co subject, she touching but subject, Chedoni, she have cared to tendency, John any touching but you can see, oh, teaches one.
So here, when we make this kind of resolve, thinking, I'm going to attain the state of Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings, and for the sake of, or for the purpose of benefiting all others, some may think that, like, well, okay, I can't really benefit or help work for the welfare of others until I attain that state of Buddhahood. So there's this sense of, like, I need to get there before I'm really able to benefit other sentient beings. But we really shouldn't understand it in that way. We should recognize that Buddhas come from bodhisattvas, and bodhisattvas train for a long time in all of these various disciplines, such as generosity and ethics and patience, joyous effort, meditative concentration, and wisdom, in order to be able to benefit sentient beings. And so we need to have a more sort of long-term, far-sighted kind of approach. When we think about like the person that we are, if we think back, well, we were in our mother's womb at one point, and we might not really identify with the sort of being that was in our mother's womb, but the continuum of consciousness, this extremely subtle mind, continued and was there at that time, is there with us now, and will continue into future lives. And so really we need to expand our kind of field of vision to think more long-term, to recognize that we are going to be working for lifetime after lifetime in order to be able to attain a state where we can fully benefit sentient beings by knowing completely all of their kinds of dispositions and needs, desires, and so forth. But this kind of future Buddhahood that we are going to attain, it represents the sort of culmination of all of those trainings, but it doesn't mean that we are not able to work for the benefit of others along the way. And so we shouldn't have this sort of single-pointed focus on Buddhahood as being when we can then work for the welfare of others, but rather recognize that our training will go for a long time in order to culminate in that state of Buddhahood where we are completely endowed with qualities to benefit other sentient beings.
Oh yeah, that's Chanju Semdelia. Dandanga said the Kunzu Chanju Semsegara. Kunzu Chanju Semse. Oh, the Kosilabin Sems. Kunzu Chanju Semse. Ra and Simjalia, Chetan Gang Sanje. Sanje Shagato Batabo. Kansachi or a Kunse and de Kundenji. Kansa Simjan Shandalia. Chetan Babu Kansachi or the Kunzura, Kunzu Chikura. Oh, they tending at you someday. Simjan get her troop to get never young sober connect her troop to get. And then Sugi could touch all together. Simbies the Simbipan Shandun Serianda, so which Chanju do Sigua. The Simgate and the Chanju Sim Kariki Goresana, Tabachimbu Samlo Karuko Goresana. Shangi turned to be a Chedu. And Shandu Serianda, so which Chanju do say. And that's also Yamabada Shijetiba Pangang Kansachi Juna, Rangaton Tarshimba Pando Tarshin, and Shangiton Tarshiba Pando Tarshiba Connection Chusung Tonge, Kansachi Chavi in some Gdoa, or the so Sukula Migiore, Chutan Tonge, Kansa de la Mine, Tendre Kansachi, Mik Kansachi Gura Chagin some Gura, Tesonako Kuzu Chanjugi Sem Sigore. Tondam Chanjugi Sem Sig Tongbani Tobe, Musum to Tobe Shitil Sigora. Oh, Tilia, Tondam said, Sanjay Kutelia Tinikasura. Rashinam da Chajuba, Lubundam da Chajose. Rashinam da said, Sem getting Chuni, Sanjay Tuju, Sem getting Chuni, Timenta with Sem getting Chuni Joara. Or Tingus to Toyo, no Tombanusum to Todu, Shetam Jig Tombanusum to Togo, Titantambaroa. Or this one that Tondam Sem Gas Mendasharava. Oh, this is
So then, therefore, having familiarized yourself with compassion as the basis, meditate on the awakening mind of bodhicitta. And bodhicitta is of two types. So conventional bodhicitta here comprises the kind of thought, when we think about the state of Buddhahood, like the historic Buddha Shakyamuni, who taught to sentient beings in order to alleviate their sufferings. This is a kind of person. And so the sort of thought which wishes for the benefit of other beings, to attain complete enlightenment, to attain perfect enlightenment, this wish to attain the state of Buddhahood, wherein we are able to be of greatest benefit to others, this is really the conventional kind of bodhicitta. And our main aim with this is the form body, the kind of result that allows us to work for the aims of others. So when we gain when we have attained the perfection of our own aims, as well as the aims of others, where we have this state where we have removed all of our obscurations and defilements, and we have generated all good qualities, we are then able to help lead others along that path. So this is the kind of conventional mind of bodhicitta, as it's said in the Ornament for Clear Realization, the wish to achieve highest enlightenment for the welfare of others. That thought really comprises conventional bodhicitta. And ultimate bodhicitta is really this this wisdom directly realizing emptiness. So we can talk about the sort of nature dharmakaya, which is really referring to this this sort of nature of the mind of enlightenment, the mind of a Buddha, that is by its nature free from any kind of adventitious stains, is naturally pure. So that ultimate bodhicitta is referring to this wisdom realizing emptiness, and that kind of empty nature of the mind realizing emptiness.
Oh yeah. No, then touch and you some case on Juba Paro de Chimbatulu Labri Ordo. Simjet Tamjet to Sanje to combat over Chatedo, Chimbadan, Sudim, Sabada, Samdenda, Shirabla of Paro de Chimbatu de Liatine, Tandane Bezich and the Conda Condu Pigi Ordo. Oh, T. Dizako, Chimbat Sudim Saba, Samden, Tezusamade, Sunam gets all the soul to Guara. Sanje Jumjende Sanje Kuts, Chansambo Sumjusai, Pejasambo Chachutema, Sanje Shingam, near Pusum Soba, Rova, or Tenis, Tabe Shingam La Soba, Tezu to the Zosagiora. Oh, Tesonani, Sanje Sugudi, Chansambo Sumju Pejasambo Chachutema, or Tesumani, Chan Chusum Genge, Kansa de So Duvati, Sunam de So de Chedua, So Sugundu Chiku, Kansa. Tarshimbe Kansa de Dupsi Churova, Neta Luta Longe Pusum Sopa. Oh, Tichuara, Telecoyara. Tapsigra, Teletap, the Shiram Nigan and the Tapsidu, Chimba Sudum Saba some day, or the Zola Tapsin, Tuji Sheva, the Tap the Shiram Yesidu. Shirab said it's all Tombani Dog Shirab, Shirab Shenda, you are in a so Tombani Dog Shirab Tira. Tombani Dog Shirab Tandam Janjuk sent the courage and Kogurasana. Arazolia Chinjula Julo, Yamambala Sobatazu Kiage, Zawa de Karasne, Che Tada Shen, Yu Tanye, Yidowala Sobakanga, Rangwin Sutup Dutch. Sosina Ramachi Ranga Ranga using it Chitang with the Tuba. Shenda to Rangwin Sutrai and Bandushi Shimba, Penji, but in this Samliora. Rawan to Tuba Sidwa. Oh, Tinde Samluchi ever take any. Chakba you Raman to Banjani, Chakbaki, Tadu Rawan to Banjani, Kondoki. Oh, this one done. Tetabu Yumba to the Pa, Sawa Yonsade, Tadu Chimbatadua, Kansa Tansi, the Chick that starts in the Rawan, Rawan Tani Yuban Simba, Rawan Tani change Kansa Yuban Simba, Rawan Tani change so. You don't know, try near La Sopa. Tender Zimbalitan and it, Tata Nienda, Tender Samlu, Numo Session between Guada, telling you and Dipsy Guada. T. Paksade, T. Shu Nibada Cheba, Paksadelia, Shitips, Shisiba. Chetam Jaganelu Chita was in the Sheba Tibe, Shisitibas. Or Tini, the Yomo, but the Shisitiban, the Pancudora. Negam Yamo Kondonga get out all the sober Tezupanku Yode. And it Tezugi, Sabun the Sheba Pangsona, and Shizatamje, Sibala Toba Mebachagi or no. Or Titon Dalichan Jews, Tondam Chanju Semte Kuyara. Oh, did do that, yeah.
So then, on the basis of generating this kind of aspiration to attain unsurpassed, complete, and perfect awakening in order to benefit all wandering sentient beings, we then engage in the various kinds of trainings of a bodhisattva, training in the six perfections for the sake of that kind of highest complete enlightenment. And so these practices constitute primarily the accumulation of merit, of the two accumulations, merit and wisdom. The accumulation of merit primarily accomplishes the form body of a Buddha. So this includes the kind of a body complete with all of the major marks and minor signs, the sort of pure environment of a Buddha. These are accomplished through the accumulation of what we call the kind of method side or the merit side. So it is on the basis of accumulating those kinds of causes, accumulating this great store of merit, that one attains this kind of personhood in which one is able to teach the Dharma and attains an excellent body, an excellent abode, and sort of entourage and so forth. So this is what is the primary result of our practices of the method side, which again encompass things like generosity and ethical conduct and so forth. And then there is the wisdom side, the accumulation of wisdom. And here there are many different types of wisdom, but we're really mainly referring to this wisdom realizing emptiness. And so our minds normally grasp at things in this kind of deluded, mistaken sort of way, as if they had some kind of existence from their own side, set up without any sort of kind of contingency or being dependent upon anything else. And so all phenomena, whether it's sights and sounds, people that we find attractive or those that we dislike, our friends, our enemies, seem to have their own sort of autonomous existence, as if they existed from their own side. And it is on the basis of that we then give rise to all kinds of our afflictive emotions. So our afflictive emotions of anger and jealousy and so forth have as their root this fundamental ignorance that is grasping at some sort of self, some sort of self of the person that has some sort of autonomous existence, or a kind of self of various phenomena like sights and sounds and so forth. And so those afflictive obscurations, that is, those various afflictions that we give rise to, like anger and jealousy and so forth, are one kind of obscuration that we're trying to remove through developing this wisdom, as well as the kinds of obscurations to omniscience, which are comprised of those kinds of imprints of our various afflictions. And so we're trying to remove these kind of temporary things like our anger, our jealousy, our hatred, and so forth, as well as the root of those and the seed of those kinds of afflictive emotions. And so it is through the practice of wisdom primarily that one is able to remove these afflictive obscurations as well as the obscurations to omniscience.
Oh yeah, don't do that. Don't what you live. Tenetsawe Ninja Combarcha, Chanjuk Sem Combarcha Ochera. Tachanjuk Sem Dene Nambani Des New Resera. Kunzuk Chanjuk Sem down Tandam Chanjuk Sem New York. Kunzuk Datamba Osedoa. Tela Kunzuk Ne Ninja Semjen Tada. One bar Dumba Tamchen. Dola Penta Becher Sanje Su Kurchi, Yamdolana Mebayanda, but Sobe Chanjun Debe Sem Tambo Keba Osita, Kunzu Chanju Sembi, Rangsha Mo, the Karel Sigresena, Tela Kunzu Chanju Sem Nesigora, Ninji Semje Tadas, Ninji Sembutene, Semje Tongena Samutada Dakane, Semje de Tonge Tadele Chavar Debe, Tonge Tamje the Chavar de Tagachagi some Techeto. And the Raka could say, you take the Sanji Komato, chugging some sympathy or no. Oh, the Kunzum Nes, Kunzum Chanju Semne, Ninji Wange, Semjan Tada, number Tungele, number Dumber Deves, Koe Tungele, number Dumber Deves, Tarban Deve, Debar, Tamchenes, Tagachao, Namdo Tamchene, Dollar Pentak Becheres, Nedroas and Jet Namriatene, Pentak Berchevecheto. Sanjay, Pen Cardagos, Koya Dongele, Churtani, and it Tapa, Penta which to Sungurdo. Penta which is Sanjay Sukurchi, Yamdolana, Mebayanda, Watobe, Chanjun Debe, and Debe, Sem Tambuke Baos, Sanjay Lana Meba Yanda was always Sanju. Tuesday Yamdo, Lana Meba Telecon Meba. Yanda was always Yunden also saw what Tashimba. Togbe Yunde, Pangbe Yunde, La Soba, Tetu Samba, Yanda was always Yunde Tashimbe. Chanju Debe, Lana Mebe, Chanju, Sanjay Yokova, Tobar Debe, Sim Tambu Kiba also Teleatine. Kunzu Chanju ji semse rangshin tende chile simje tamje utando sanje ji koban toban debe semdere tatunda teacher wa sem tambo je ba was de sem tambo se me sem sigora membe sem da semje tele me sem ta ju sem se ni yorba tambo dele ya semje tamje utando sanje ji koban toba jurji toba chagi samsa tera ta tobe che do chanju sembe tomba sone Chanju Semba Sanje Koban Tobe Chedo, Tomba Kalan, and it's a powder to Simba Tula, so a Karaka Lokina. There's a sometimes looking some Tamja Batalia, and then Mersim Dan Jusim Sira, Jusim. Cheba powder to Chanju Semba Tombalane, Cheba powder to Chimbala Soba, Tombela Chakarine Tezulim, looking in some Tamja Besem Yetela, Jubasem Gisora. Tambu Tambu Jet, member some Geshe members on the top of Chagi some Roa. Ticheliata, Tetobe Chedu Chanju Sembanam, the Chanju Sembanam, Tombalan, the Candidate United Nation, Chibaparu Chimbatula Soba Kangal, Chungi some Chanju Semba Tombalane, Jotumgi, Tombalambe, Kugisem and Juba Sem Gesera. Not the Pechan Songi, draw and dirt and draw a Chita Shivas. Meeting at Trongilia Chain doing Legatit and Darling at Trongilia doing some touches on a mercy derwa. Don't draw and go through it, then draw a shadow more than combat them and doing at the Pandrosona and it in Juba Sembira, most far Chavala and Jugu, Juba Sembini or no teaches to the yeah.
So here, then, to get back to the text, it says that, again, having familiarized with compassion as the basis, meditate on the awakening mind of bodhicitta. And this bodhicitta is of two types, conventional and ultimate. So conventional, the sort of nature, the essence of conventional bodhicitta is here the cultivation of the initial thought that aspires to attain unsurpassed, complete, and perfect awakening in order to benefit all wandering sentient beings. And then, so the sort of nature of this is really thinking about the suffering nature of sentient beings, how they are afflicted by these various forms of dukkha, and then wishing that they be freed from their sufferings and the way in which you are able to really fully free or benefit sentient beings is through attaining Buddhahood, this unsurpassed state that has completed all of the kinds of qualities. We've gotten rid of all faults, attained all of the qualities of the various abandonments and realizations and so forth, and are thereby truly able to work for the benefit of other sentient beings. So this is the kind of nature of this attitude or this mind of wanting to be able to benefit sentient beings and recognizing that in order to really do that, we need to attain a state in which we ourselves have removed all of our faults and gained all good qualities. And so this initial sort of thought that aspires to that, we would call kind of aspirational bodhicitta. There are, again, different translations of this. But when one has first had this thought, like, I will strive for Buddhahood in order to benefit sentient beings, we then, if one takes up the vow, actually formally takes a bodhisattva vow, and then engages in the trainings, we would call that engaged or sort of active bodhicitta. One has then made the pledge saying, I'm going to engage in these various practices of generosity and ethics and patience and so forth, the six perfections, in order to be able to attain this state for the benefit of sentient beings. And so at the beginning, we have sort of just an aspiration. And then when one says, I'm going to, in the way that Buddhas in the past actually trained in these various trainings, I am going to do that as well. One takes up this kind of active form, as Shantideva has described it in his Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. The sort of distinction between these is the sort of wish to go and then actually going. That's how we should understand the distinction between these two. So you could have someone who's resolved, oh yeah, I'm going to go to town, but they're not actually making any sort of arrangements, making any movements to get there. And then you have the person that's actually, oh, I'm going to get there and making active sort of strides in that direction. That's how we should understand the difference between a kind of aspirational and active bodhicitta.
Oh yeah. The same tambo kibo some sim jerwa. Tan jutum limbe choga shegora. Jube tombade and Chanju Semba Shanda, Chanju Semba Tomba Yungenge, and a lama Julia Tomba Shukuyoto, then Jube Tombade. Chanju Semba Tomba de Langura. Then Sudim de Lule, Tembe Choga Shindose, Tele Choga, Chani Shukuyare. Chanju Semba Tomba la Neb, Keba Parubulas, Chanju Semba Tomba Yungenge, Keba Parubu, Chile Lankures Ngora. O tele ane ten dune sem ke barcha ose tade choga yorno dan choga to du cheni sitangon ji teshi ji chanju to ni ke barasa ngi tawar she bato ju chanju chodo to kene sanje ji ko ban to ban ja bateshi do sigorno sitangon ji chanju to ji bat chanju sem bela bala tada rim shinya bada chanju sem bela je kare ne to lu panje ke ba ma bo kale kem la bana shin sigorno Tage Jan Zimbashin to Lapin Yense, to the Kelango Yato, tell him Juktum Limbe Choga the Shake do Andine. Then Chudim Gi, Lule Tembe Choga, Shindu Chanju Sembe Tombala Neba, Keba Padu Polese, Sem Geber Chawose, Jubet Chanju Sembe Tombalam Beconani, Jukwesem Gikeva Chakores, Jukdumgi, Chanju Sembe Tombe Lapche Sembe Chanju Semdela, Jukwesem Gesiore. Tomba Meshuba Kabi, and each and but shooting Sabasola Sanada, Tinega with some Gitilia, remember some Gesigora, no teacher. Some Gaber Chawose. What did you know?
So then this bodhicitta, conventional bodhicitta, is sort of, we have first this thought that is a kind of aspirational bodhicitta. So conventional bodhicitta is the cultivation of the initial thought that aspires to attain unsurpassed, complete, and perfect awakening in order to benefit all wandering sentient beings, after having taken the vow out of compassion to release them from suffering. So that conventional bodhicitta should be cultivated in a process similar to that described in the chapter on ethical conduct, and generating this mind by taking the bodhisattva vow before a master who abides by the bodhisattva precepts. So normally we take this vow, take the bodhisattva vows from a master, from someone who holds those kinds of bodhisattva vows themselves. And then on that basis, we ourselves take up this kind of vow. And there is a sort of ritual by which we do this. It's described in various texts, but generally we are reciting after a master that we are taking it from, recognizing and saying, as earlier bodhisattvas of the past have trained in the various perfections, so too I am going to train in order to gain the state of Buddhahood. And so this when we initially take that vow, when we initially sort of make the aspiration, that's called aspirational bodhicitta. But then once we have taken the vows and we are actively kind of holding those precepts and trainings, that becomes active bodhicitta.
Oh yeah. Oh, Tenia Kasoda. Kisi Tombala Yuki, right? Shanda Sanju Simba Tomba and Dembe, Shanda Mato, Beckham, Tendea, Tomba Sanje Chumden de Go, Shaja Tiller, Tombang Sanjim Wagin Dushisha, Tenjitron to Lande, de Gora, Tenjitron to Test Socialist, also Sitasia, Chawashendo. Learn some dancing young talk when they change each other some gig some Tenderland into so do. Oh, did you wish it? Tandamba Chanju Jesem Tene, Tandi Nibatilia, Kunzu Chanju Jesem Keba Sam Digmara, Tandamba Chanju Semake Gore, State Ambudua, Chanju Semira, Tandamba Chanju Sem Diranshi, Dendesirete, Kegore, State Ambis, Sungudua. Tandamba Chanju Jesem Denin Jigdel and Deva Ase, Jigdel and Deva, Treva Dada Trevas, and Shindu Sawa. Tandambe Chuyu, Tima Meba, Miowa, Long Mebe, Mami Kundar, Miowa Wose. That Tandambe Chanju is same day, Jidel and Deba, so Sami in Gura. Talk by in a drill, Martagi, Kunzu Chanju is same day, that they change the talk about it or not. Pecha to Meju Masha, Chanju Sam Kegureso, Tinashan, so to Tentation, Simja Tamjet to Wasayako, Chagi, some Tala Temba. Talk about it or not, and Mato Musum Tendeke more Jurgumare. That under Tontam Chanju simply Tambuta Sambacha, Tombanilla, Tombanusum do Tobe, Ishitelia, Tontam Chanju Samsigora. Don't you Tenjitsu talk about the Tezul Tontam Chanju Samsigomare. Oh, did Tontam Chanju gets some Jigdel and Deba, so Same, Tombanusum do Tobe, issues from the Kosaba Mebra, Jigdel and Deba. Treba Tata Trebas, Kunzuki now a Mercury, Nina no Gurua. Trebas do Kunzuki now until Trebasiguara. Bosebo Kavamabu Soban, Treba Tesulia, Treba Nishi Tembas, Kunzube Treba, she was called, and now I'm ever Tomba Chanja, Rangune Tomba Chanja Musum to Charamato, similar Charamato, Kunzuki now, Nubashikora. Tomba Tesuina, Kunzuki now a Shadi. Treba Tata Trevas. Shindu Savas, that Musum Sodako, you the Shindu Sabatonga Square, Musum Totongasha. Turned and bet you to my members. In a third and bet you to them Temba Tombani, you change the quarters to you say. To my member, Mioa. Mioa Sodako, she never to dig by Sindba, such a negate quarters from Gota, Mioa. Low maybe. Mami Kundar Miwas. Long Jabgina Mamipa Yoshitegra, Long Chairman Mamiba Kaduba Tegra or Tamboshinake or Tendiscore. Start on that. Don't bet you some sitting or the Tomba Musum do Tongang. Treva da Treva, Kunzuki Treva da Treva, Tomba Janja, Musum do Tone. Sula Susha, but to say Nina Meba. You send the knee this now Meba. O Tendetalia. Tandam Chaju with some cigarettes, Tandam Chaju with some young old Zishegua. What is it?
So here, in terms of taking these kinds of bodhisattva vows, if one doesn't have a qualified master who holds the bodhisattva vows, if you have a person who sincerely wishes to take up these kinds of vows, they can do so by making prostrations to, say, a representation of the Buddha and reciting 3 times these verses with the sincerity, and they can actually take up these conventional take up this mind of conventional bodhicitta through a vow, even in the absence of such a person holding the vows. So we continue by saying that it's not enough to just generate this conventional bodhicitta, but after generating the conventional awakening mind of bodhicitta, endeavor to cultivate the ultimate awakening mind of bodhicitta. And so here we get into a description of the kind of nature, the essence of this ultimate bodhicitta. And so when we are talking about ultimate bodhicitta, this is something that is sort of stainless. It's or it's supramundane. It's not something that is on the same level of conceptuality as we have with conventional bodhicitta. So when we are, say, thinking about compassion and generating those kinds of attitudes, we go through a kind of a conceptual process, but that doesn't become a direct realization in the way that when we are talking about what we refer to as ultimate bodhicitta, this is actually that wisdom directly realizing emptiness. And so when we are looking at wisdom that, say, realizes emptiness through some sort of generic or a mental image, that is not, again, ultimate bodhicitta, but it's only when we have this direct realization of emptiness that is, as it's described here. Ultimate bodhicitta is transcendental and free from all elaborations. So free from the kinds of elaborations of conceptuality in terms of conventional kinds of objects. In this context, duality has been removed. Only emptiness is appearing to mind, and all conventionalities are absent. We don't have any sort of appearance of conventionalities, and that's what's referred to here with free from all elaborations. And it is extremely clear, the object of the ultimate stainless, unwavering, like a butter lamp undisturbed by the wind. And so this kind of wisdom directly realizing emptiness has an extreme clarity to it. And again, it's stainless and unmoving. Here, this is referring to its being based upon a kind of serenity wherein one has that stability of mind. And so one is able to remain stably, directly realizing emptiness without any sort of appearance of an object or subject. All duality has disappeared. This is what is referred to as this ultimate bodhicitta, and it's something that has, again, this kind of stability, like a butter lamp undisturbed by the wind.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. That tamba, tamba ni mashu de yungu yikiri sambudo. Tamba ni se de tak sosol kansa sosol shabina. Sosol de pumbunga la tene tabade de orno. Sosol yese de lo sobuchi ore, shibachi ora, simchi orno. Suji pumbu, ane choa dewa donye la sobanyonge. Choa pumbu ane dushi nabar shiba pumbu se, pumbu nga yora. Tango yese debri se sobuchi yore, simchi yora. Ane simchi ka choa titu nyaya richi orno. Ane giri indi mare, di yabundu, dobundu, pari, mare, kangbari, shija se, dushi yorno. O tina se ane, kiawa tanga mikiwe chawalan juba tanga. Ane kondo nga ke na sowa dushi chi pumbu nga, ta pumbu nga yorwa. Pumbu nga bu. Narazu ye chala ta masuna nga yorwa, pumbu nga duwa. Ta tila taa se de, pumbu nga bu kanru le teni pa ane, taa se taa sharwa. De mire, de tandu re, de la re, de chichi re se, rwa. De tashi re, de tandu re, taa sharwa. Ane soso ke nga tashi, nga tandu re, nga chichi sam kutwa. Leko teni pa takwa re. Pumbu nga tila loso, pe loga che, loso taa che yo ma re. Pumbu nga nane chi zubuchu ni tiriba si te yo ma re. Pumbu nga bu re re ne. Su taa ma re, chua taa ma re, dushi taa ma re, namashu taa ma re wa. Taa ne tuzu le ngo tade si. Tata pala na si, pumbu sebu na si. Pumbu nga di paa sha ya, taa di loga yo re, sen te yo ma re. Taa di pumbu la teni paa takwa re. Nga ranzu samlo na namgyu ka re se de, pumbu la teni paa nga se takwa sami yin samgu ma re. Nga rangi chi ye sam, pumbu nga sopo re, di nga sem re, di nga choa re sama do. Nga di yang loga yi loksu ye be sam kukto, rangwa chi. Nga rangu na nga rangi ye samsa, tezu paa sha na nga rangi ye samsa re sam kukto. Rangu ne chupa se to tila. Rangu ne chupa, nga rangi ye se. Chungu ne chini sopo dan sem dan choa dan dushi dan mamu chilo to si tene, taa chi tete yor do. Mado sobudan semda soa doshi jesu dosin dene chi junga da sachi melo junga da mabu jila dosin dene ane daa se chi titu nyongere chi shagu yoda tende samgu medwa hanga arangi ye samsachi pungbu che loga che pungbu tozo wang jujere che sosu de loga che loksu yebe samkoda rawa chi yona atina jugzu de zani ye gora yana sobu de yengure yana sem de yengure yana choa tina yebe chala de masonga yore ngana ne chi rebe si gora yana tile lo so kora ngabu de loga che kongo tade ya chubere chi loga yore be si gora o tini kan yo mare sache ni le pungbu tele ta de ro rangwe ne mede rangwe ne yona yana pungbu ngabu re re da shikje ni yo gore yana pungbu ngabu re re be lo so ngo tade shi ni yo gore loga tini kan yo mare si gora ane tata ka mer besena tenchi debar chunga rwa tenchi debar chunga ka tene tongpa nidu shaya shara shenta la tuishin tene rake ngo chubu yo sa ko rangwe ne tongpa re si gora ta chene ko yo mar besena ta yo mar besena mewa ma re si gora yewa re si gora kande re sena tenchi debar chunga ka tene tongpa nidu tene takpa te tene ume lang tene takpa tsamla shaa go re si gora pungbu la tene takpa tsamla pungbu chawa chidu taga chawa chiba shaa go re kane keji shedu taga keji shegi se go re lakpa yudu taga yuyu chigi se go lakpa taga marwa sobu taga marwa semki samlu tanga za taga samlu taga tu se kondu se de taga kondu se shaa se kondu taga marwa tezu la tene takpa tsamla chawa chiba shaa go re pungbu nga bo re re ke chawa chiba de taga chawa chiba shaa go re rwa di mena pungbu le ngo tade tu da yo na pungbu chawa chiba taga chawa chiba dhugma lakwa yebe yone yeme yubba dhugma rwa yebe yone yeme chawa dhugma rwa taga chawa chiba de palang chawa chiba dhugma rwa kunye ngo tade rin teme rwa ati nani taga sheshe me dhoye me deye me taga kiwa tuye me nigewa saya me tende shaa dhugma pungbu chawa chiba zo taga chawa chiba shaa go ra daga tsam ju tribu che ware ti che kangare ta kyangya mare kangbare chine dara kangbe koda ke kun chala be mambu yora saba mambu yora tezo re ne re yo mare kangba tile lo so be kangba siya rawa chikura loga yo mare te tezo le tene kangba spa ta gore tezo te de so na kangba nal te yo si daga shaya re ma do nga te sa di shabja di kangba de se de kangba de mara te de kangba na te se oda te tsam bi sha go yara o te son jo ko te je de bar jo ga tene tong ba ni de se tene ta ba te tene o me la mi no se raung ne tu ba me sha shi ne ba chi ya tene ta ba tsam do cha she da da shi tu de le ga chi de ko le ga chen ge ji sha go de se go ra o te de ngo bo ka da ra 코로나를 지쳐져 대여를 최세로 가셨어. 대주 초벌을 때는 봤다고 요래 맞도. 대소를 따고 때마다 상황이 그런 뭐 탐제 저 탐제다 집어래. 어디 없이 실람나. 뭐시 원에 연구를 길을 삼게요.
So here then we get into this topic of emptiness. And so we have, and more of this will come below, but just to give a kind of a rough overview of this, we have on the basis of these 5 aggregates, our form, our feelings, our sort of discrimination or discernment, our compositional factors, the compositional factors in our mind, our consciousness. On the basis of these, we go through sort of life. We make various decisions. We engage in virtues and non-virtues. We experience happiness and suffering and so forth. And so we talk about this person, and this person is something that is designated on these aggregates. But when we begin to sort of look in and investigate, we see, well, we have these 5 aggregates, but where is the person, the sort of self within those aggregates? I mean, we can look at like, oh, well, that's a person and that's an animal and that's a god and so forth. But when we really begin to then investigate and look, well, what is it within those 5 aggregates that we can point to and say, well, this is the person, we can't actually find something that we can point to as being the person or the self within those aggregates. But aside from these 5 aggregates, we can't speak of something that is the self, that is somehow apart from that. If there is something that is separate, that is different in terms of its nature, kind of like yellow and blue, or like a horse and a cow, then we can't have any sort of relationship or connection between them. So our self is not something that is separate from our aggregates. Otherwise, we couldn't talk about like, well, I'm angry. Well, the self can't get angry if the sort of anger that's in the mind is something fundamentally different from the self. If there's this sort of separation between our aggregates and the person or the self. And so the self is something that is designated on the basis of the aggregates, but we don't see it in the way that it's actually that it actually exists in terms of being merely designated on the aggregates, but rather we normally have the sense of there's sort of an autonomous self, that we have this self that possesses these aggregates, that like is in charge of them somehow, and all things, all sort of phenomena that we look around at, anything that appears to us, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, whatever it is, we have the sense of it being this kind of autonomous thing that is not dependent upon our mentally designating it, not contingent upon anything else. But when we examine, we can't find, again, some sort of self that has an existence apart from, distinct from our aggregates. So we then say, well, is it something within those like 5 things, those aggregates that we have? What can we point to that actually is that self? So when we look at our contaminated, appropriated aggregates, we can't find anything within them that we can point to as being that self in the way that it appears to us, as if it were a sort of autonomous and set up from its own side. But then we ask, well, is such a self then non-existent? Does it just not exist at all? Well, the answer is no. It's not that it's non-existent, but rather it's something that's dependently designated. And so as the quotation goes, whatever is dependently originated is described as emptiness, is said to be emptiness. And whatever that which is dependently designated, this is the middle path. So here, again, when we are doing this kind of investigation, we can't sort of find anything that we can point to within the aggregates as being the self, as actually comprising this self that we feel exists. But we also can't find something sort of apart from the aggregates that could act or that could be the self, because then we couldn't sort of say like, well, I am doing this action when our form, when our body is engaged in something, because that self and those aggregates have sort of no connection whatsoever. And again, this is not something that just applies to persons, but rather all phenomena we view in this same kind of way. Like if we take a house, well, there is something that is called a house, but we then look at sort of what within that basis of designation of the house, begin to look at the windows and doors and so forth. And we say, well, is there something I can point to as really being this house? We can't find something that we can point to as being that. And it also can't exist somewhere separate apart from that. And so in this way, we should understand that things are dependently designated, that which is dependently originated is explained to be emptiness. And this is the kind of sort of contemplation that one will engage in, and more of this will come below when we get into the discussion of wisdom.
Oh yeah. Oda tamba kasura. Tomba ni komduza ko treba kunzu beche tu yamarno. Treba ni shishi. Du kasur. Zawa shiru chuju ka songwa. Kange tenje do gawa me ti me shawa ta ngore ta. Treba ni shishi den ba se. Ti sonja ko kunzu beche yamare. Tongpa Jangjare, Kari Tongpare, Rangwene Tribe Tongpa, Chitamje, Dadan Shenda, Suta, Tero, Rejala Soba, Shironi Biko Sumba Namse, Sume, Tame, Timero, Mese, Rangwene Tribe, Mesungu Gordon. Tayina Tongpa Jangjare, Tongpa Komna, Shimba Chutin Soba, Samdela Soba, Kunjube Chutu Yomare, Tesu Tengo Mare, Singing Yomato, Tiashange, Kasitalia Roswan. Tongpa Nima Toko Mare, so Tijani Yomare. Karasana, Sunam Ji Tso the Mana, Sanje Ji Suku Dubji, Judi Sagi Yomare. Shingam Sanje Ji Tagwe Shingam Dubjita, and Sanje Ji Ku, Chansambo Sumju Sanje Peja Sambo Teju Tebala Soba, Tim Dubji Tuyong Yomare. Chimba Tsutim Soba, Samdela Soba, Tesuma Buchi Tesu Gordon, Sunam Sotiri. Niji Chimboda, Chambada, Niji Chaju, Simla Soba, Kundelani, Chimba Tsutim Soba Soba, Simjatado, Kunzubi Shumabu Yodo, or Tesu Manani, Tabji Chati, Sunam Jitso the Mana, Sukun Duji Kuzo Maricha Yoda. Oh, Dongbani de Magona, Ishi Sukun Duji Tuti. Mishiba Mombata Che, Joanumba Sije Tibata Chene, Jeve Simgimo, Dotretlia, Dongbani de Congo Yoda. The Dongbani Telia, Namgu Sondeji, Dongbani Segua. Chimba Tsudin Saba, Samdela Soba, Tabjicha, Chamba Nijila Soba, Tezuko Yore. Tezu Tamjadan Dembe Tombanish Komgoramato, Tezu Manging Tombanishana, any Sanji Goma Duji, to Sunam Yetsode, Sugu Duji, to the Sangiomare. Ne Pusum Soba, Lu Pusum Soba, Longe Pusum Soba, Duji, to Sangiomare. Oh, Tejis Suna.
So here in meditating on emptiness, as it explains, ultimate bodhicitta is transcendental and free from all elaborations. Like we see in the praise, the homage in Nagarjuna's root verses on wisdom, where it's describing emptiness as being peace, free from any sort of elaborations. This means that this kind of mind realizing emptiness is free from any sort of elaborations of conceptuality or our ordinary conventional kind of thinking. We are realizing in that meditation on emptiness alone, the absence of any kind of establishment from the side of the object, the ways that things normally appear to us as being established, existing from their own side. When we are in this meditation on emptiness, none of that kind of existence appears to us. And so someone might then think that, well, when I'm meditating on emptiness, there's no need for any of these practices of the method side, any of the generosity and ethics and so forth that have been described. Well, that would be a very mistaken kind of attitude, because although when one is in that meditative equipoise directly realizing emptiness, there is no conceptual elaboration or the elaborations of these various practices like generosity and ethics and so forth, but these are indispensable causes in terms of the accumulation of merit that leads to the resulting form body of a Buddha. To be able to have the kind of result of the excellent body with all of the 32 major marks and 80 minor signs, as well as the kind of pure land of a Buddha, the pure abode and entourage and so forth, one needs to accumulate this great store of merit on the method side that act as the cause for that resulting form body, which allows us to actually teach to others. And so while the kind of nature of mind, free from any sort of stains, naturally empty and so forth, is something that we realize directly within the meditation on emptiness, that itself is not sufficient. We need to be generating these other kinds of causes. The store of merit is something that is indispensable to gaining this full state of Buddhahood, and thereby the practices of generosity and ethics and patience, joyous effort, meditative concentration all need to be conjoined with this mind realizing emptiness, although they're not directly there in that moment.
Oh, yeah. Tadi malo shantimara. Tatin Juba Nesi to Atanga to the Tondam Chanju Gisem de Shaswa. Tondam Chanju Gisem de Juba Laswara. Then Juba Neta do Kubara, Nurendo, Shineda Hadongi, Nanger, Combar Chebal, Judesa. Oh, Tomba Musum to Tobe, Tondam Sanjeti Kebar Chebalia, Shine going to Congo. Shine Jumne, any Tomba Musum to Tog the Mato. Shine Matobaria, Tomba Musum to Toyomara, Totu Oh, Chanju sem dejene, Chanju sem Kebala, Shine Koyomara. Shine Mana Chambada, Niji Chanju sem la soba, Keto Gora. Oh, Tisonja, Tanda di Tombani Musum to talk back, Tandam sem Kevalia, Tin Dubziki, Shine, Sangores, Shine Dal Hardon Sigra. Tin Jubane Tadu Kubara, Yendo, Shine Dal Hardonge, Najur Comba. Combarcebole Judis or the Shine dal Haldon Combalatane, and it tomba Yungusum to talk with Tandam Semgiki Gores, Tandam Semgiki, Kudishegua, Tandam Semgiki, Kushila, some digiting is a top Gores, Shine dal Haldon is so do everything is a top Gores, Tishegura. Oh, Combarcebole Jude, Papa Comba never drove Chicago, study Kungtara. Chamba Khan Yandu Namgyam, Shazu Samba Namgyam, Tishin Shikwa Namgy, Tivesu, Jinedan, Jinelan Deba Tamje, Jan, Shinedan Hadongi, Jebu Yimba, Rikbar Shao Shi, Sumba Tabu Osa. Oh, Tandi Yandu Dan, Rangi Dan, Tekwa Shimbi, Shazu Samba Namgy, and the Yonda Kadishin and Sungurno. Nyandu Gam, Shazu Samba Namgyam, Tishin Shikwa Namgy, Tivesu. Tivesu Jinedan Jinelan Deba Tamje, Shinedan Hadongi, Jebu Yimba, Rikbar Shao Se. That Shinedan Hadongi, Jebu Yin said, Shine one at Alhadongo, Jebu Yingumare. Shinedan Hadon Mato Beculia, Nyandu Rangi, Shazu Samba Tuticula, Solamba, Tendekapsia, Yandeshanda Mabu Yorno. The Shinedan Hadongo, Jebu Yingumare. Don't the Carson Gorsana. Shine de sem chichik ban joye dera, jokum dera. Alhaton se do cheba cheba dera. Chedan cheba cheba da sem chichik don jogba ni kin debu dese. Chegum aga chegorwa. Chamba ni ji chaju sem la soba kome yande kandesina. Yande chegum chene chegorwa. Sa chegum da jogum kanro ki debu re, chegum da jogum ki debu mai bayo maresta shine ki. So my be computer, Jogum derwa. Ladongi computer, Chegum chen coeterwa. Chegum dan Jogum ye debu in by Shiva Shaw Mado. Shine the Ladon debu in by Shen Jegomare. Shine the Ladon debu be Kabayo Mado. Chanson Solan by Julia. Shine the Ladon Mato by Chanson Solan by Julia. And you and Mabu Yordan. Near Julia and Mabu Yordan. To Shine the Ladon debu Mare, Shine the Ladon Tobio Maro. Oh, Tina. And they come from Jebu in so to us the Carasana. Shineda Lato de Comsu, Jagum da Jogum, Karum de Comsu, the Jebu in Gode, some Caressa, Tandara. Oh, teach you know.
No. So here, then we are picking up on this topic of ultimate bodhicitta. So it goes into describing the kind of causes that lead to ultimate bodhicitta. So this is achieved through constant and respectful familiarity with the yoga of serenity and insight over a long period of time. So we need to, in order to be able to generate this kind of ultimate bodhicitta, develop the kind of proper causes. And in order to have the sort of insight and this union of insight and serenity is what leads to the generation of ultimate bodhicitta, we need to have as a foundation this kind of serenity, the ability to stay single-pointedly focused focused on an object, that kind of stability allows us to then engage in the sort of insight that will bring about a direct realization. And so here, giving a quotation, a source from this, for this, it says then, the Unraveling the True Intention Arya Sutra says, O Maitreya, you must know that all the virtuous dharmas of hearers, bodhisattvas, or tathagatas, whether worldly or transcendental, are the fruits of serenity and insight. So here we have to recognize that this can't be taken sort of literally as actual serenity and actual insight, but rather referring to the kinds of meditation that we have here, a sort of placement meditation symbolized by serenity, and a sort of analytical meditation, which is encapsulated in what we're calling insight, because we can look at various qualities that are not arisen from actually developing fully authentic, fully definitional serenity and insight. For example, all of the kinds of qualities within the continuum of a bodhisattva on the path of accumulation who has not yet achieved that, those qualities come about through engaging in sort of placement meditation, that sort of stilling of the mind and remaining single-pointedly focused, as well as analytical meditation with regard to things like love and compassion and so forth. So although we can't say that all qualities of these three types of beings, hearers, bodhisattvas, or tathagatas, are the fruits of serenity and insight. They are all the results or the fruits of a placement meditation and analytical meditation. So those are the kinds of practices that one engages in order to develop these kinds of qualities. Okay, la tanda kogi mindu. Oh.
Good way.
Tanda kogi do.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Adisha. Kavaduna. Oh, they didn't start telling me, sir. Oh, didn't do Kongtangdua, Sigedos. Chamba Kanyan, Chanju Sambanam, Tishin Shibanam, Jidan, Jidel and Deba, Jidel and Deba, Tamje, Shineta Ladong in Jebu in Bazik Shao, Shesum Batabo, Sarah, Tindra. Oh, Shineta Ladong, Comzuchegum, Jogum, Karum, in Jebu in Bashaba Shao, Tindra. That thing is Tamje Dubecher, thing nala. Shine da Ladong, you come to and it's Jacum Dan Jogum, you now letting the Tamje to the Sora. Tingy thing is Tamje Dubecher, Nanjoba, Tamje, two Tamje to neighbor, Shine da Ladong temper shows, oh, Kaduina, you and I tell something in the condition. Shine da Ladong Karungi, Kumzuli Tennis, Kekores, Jago Dan Jogum Karun Tango de Sogara. Shine da Ladong temper Papa Kumbang Evandreva, Teniles, Takondegi Long Kong Tangdoa. Then some day de Shigeto Nyandukiams, Chanju Semba Nam Dance, Tishin Shekba Nam Jiting Tomatemba Kanye Batata Tamjese. Shine da Ladongi, Tuba Rigbar Chao Shesumbato, Shine da Ladongi, Kumzu Chegum Dan Jogum Yignal Tuba Shebar Chao Songara. Tandinema Ladongi Kuba Shekdwa. Shine Zambashi Kumbar Chebeni, Nanzorwa Nambi Tiba Mebon case. Shine Simsi to never Jang come there, Shibu come there. Any Digmaris Gora. Shine Zambashi Kumbar Chebeni, Nanzorwa Nambi Tiba Mebonde. The Tiba Sabu, Numba Sabu, Dachaba Pambalia, Chegum Chen, Tombanusum to talk Yora. Tombanusum to Madonna, Tiba Numba, the Shije Tiba, Kaya Zawan Pontu Marzon. Or this on Joko, Shine Bashi come to Digmare, Cloudon come go to Shinegi, nega nyamoto su kemachuni paka pasambre mado sawane meba soto mare songora ta ladong dege ini cheba chene tangjin da tosu jimba na shi ngobe ne sule ne mane takje chene cheba chene ne mai bange sona ini sawane pongje lamle dugo to tongba ni to sona nyamo sawane pongje lamle dugo chira shine jambo komna nime anjing mare songdo nte kasa shine bashi ki kombar chebe Najoba Namje, Chiba, Mebon Gese, Mendi Samaponto Mare Songora. Rishi Nyamaba number some to say this. Sine Jang Kom Japtan, Yamo King Marwa, Kondonga, Jetadola Soba, Nega King Marwa, Nega Mejo, some Remato, Cop Sawa and Palmeros and Pango Mare Sora. Said this, Shirab Jenawan Zonga, Meber Pala, ye, Lever, some Missy Tomba ni tokbe shirab je nawa tongni ngusum du sawar tokba te mebar pagla nyes nyomo ge paksa da sheba nyomo tsawane pang to ma rese pagla nye legbar chom mesi be chero chomba de pons meba so to ma rese ngora pagla nye legbar chombar minjur te ese tevena pagba komba ngeba de wa tinye de samden jinite khung thang ge wara lagno magumna Tombanyi Toba Lagno Magumna, Nimo Zawane Ponto Marese, Shinesam di Ponto Marese, Ti Kung Dragdwa. Papa Kombang Evandra Tenide, Samden Kine, Nimo number no sa, Shira Kine Palanye, and a lebar, Jumbar Chedo, Sheka Chedos. Oh, Shineti Kalchivaresna. Samden Kine, Samden Shineti Sungurno. Something in your number, no nos. Nega Mungura make it some Pangolum, but some nega make it some days or Shira Jenny Pala and your labor, Jumba Shetos. Tombani to be Shira Chegum Jen, Tombani to be Shira. Tado Zimbala Soba and Zimba Nation in the main Chegum Chebatege, how don't come. Shira Jenny, Pala and your labor, and Jumba Shetos, Paksada Cheba. Koran da Koran ge shagbe bakshan niba sawane pambe so tore so gara o tipo to chi suna.
So here then we have again this source for the importance, or that sort of all of these practices are condensed into serenity and insight from this Unraveling the True Intention Arya Sutra, where it says again, "O my Treya, you must know that all the virtuous dharmas of the three vehicles of hearers, solitary realizers, bodhisattvas, or tathagatas, whether worldly or transcendental, are the fruits of serenity and insight." And these really represent, again, a kind of placement, single-pointed meditation, and then an analytical kind of meditation. And so all of the various qualities of those three vehicles can be sort of subsumed into these types of practices. So it continues with the commentary by maleshila. Since all kinds of concentration can be included in these two, all yogis must at all times seek serenity and insight. So here, this then turns to in another quotation saying that, again, in the same text, the Buddha said, "I declare that it should be known that the teachings of various types of concentrations sought by hearers, bodhisattvas, and tathagatas are all contained in serenity and insight." So all of the various sort of concentrations or qualities that they are trying to develop are really this can be subsumed or condensed into these two, of a sort of placement meditation of serenity and analytical meditation of insight. And so here then it turns to really an encouragement for us to develop insight, to develop wisdom, because it continues Yogis cannot eliminate mental obscurations merely by familiarizing themselves with serenity alone. So here we can't remove our obscurations, the afflictive obscurations, as well as the obscurations to omniscience, by merely meditating on a single pointed kind of serenity. We can't remove them from their seeds. We can sort of temporarily suppress our afflictions when we are in that meditation. We may not get angry or get jealous and so forth, but we aren't really removing from their roots our various obscurations. And so in order to do that, one needs to develop insight, to develop wisdom. So it continues in the text saying that this serenity alone will only suppress the afflictions temporarily. Without the light of wisdom, the latencies of the afflictions cannot be thoroughly destroyed, and therefore their complete destruction will not be possible. If we're merely suppressing the afflictions, but not getting at their latencies, their tendencies, these seeds, and removing those, they are going to just come back up again. And so here, in order to destroy them completely from their root, we need to develop this kind of insight. And so for this reason, from the Unraveling the True Intention Arya Sutra, it says, concentration can suppress the afflictions properly, and wisdom can thoroughly destroy their latencies. So we need to just develop insight or wisdom in order to really get at the roots, at the seeds of our various afflictions.
Oh, yeah, that on that.
Tering chiwa chikyores. Chiwa chilen tering chena yakusare.
Oh, dear. Oh,
Tering chiwa china digre ya.
Yeah.
Chiwa the three China digre Jemat Kalanagi.
Tanda tuju duwe.
That Mindo.
Yeah. Oh. Tanda tuju shita mindo sara. Sanyi chena.
No.
Kamanga dosa. No, sanyi chowa shanta tare. Oh, digdwa.
No.
Tanda di nga zo. Hadon delia. Yunden debsi kashe shekdo yunden shi. Shineli ya triba pon. Neva yo maris sawane. Hadon delia triba sawane pon yunden yo res titen. Ti sheji deliane. Papa kumbanga ba de samden kini. Yomo number no shirab kini. Pala nye. Lepan jo mos ti sheji tengdwa. Yunden debsi triba pon yunden yo res. Shine samgi pon tu maris tira. Tande nipa delia. O lakdon delia tunge yonsu chube. Neva yo res tengdwa. Tunge. Nyomo panchi de zanko tunge de koye tunge. Meba so neva yo res. Shine samla ti yo ma res. Tongba ni tokba lakdon sige warda. Tongba ni tokba lakdon delia. Tunge yonsu chube. Yonde yo res ti chigdwa nipa de. Papa tingin ze gyabu leja. Tingin ze de kombar che meke. Tene taatun dushi jo meche, tene nyomo cheshin rabdu chu, sajo gene tenzin komba shin. Kede chola tame, sosor teta, kede komba ne, teni nyangen de to drebi gyu kyushen kanyi teni shime gyur, shesun sosa. Awere, tingi je gyabun donal sokutwa, tingi je kombar che me kesi shine de sunguyara. Semche jebe tingi zi komba samji, tene taatun dushi jimi ji, taatun zimbala soba nyomo zi pantuku ma resi. Tene nyomo cheshin rab chuk tesi, tingi zi janjan komdene ko nyomo panju shani ya, tingi zi tembu yuna ya ko nyomo ya kegi resi ngu ra, tene nyomo cheshin rab chuk tesi. Lakchu kene tingi zi komba shinsi. Lakchu sta chiru bagi, tingi zi komba jidwa. Sanje la rendu che ko tingi zi komba. Tingi tempo kashin topare, te tomna Koran taina si chichi seba tone, ane kondu kene, chima ko sondu tongi se sola suwa, tinde, ije she yungudwa, tamji yungudwa, te songore. Lajo kene tingi tempo topare de, sosu ta chichi seba tonje, tashan buyo anjira ma, te kondu sene, ane, ne song kiawara soba, tinde luju she yungudwa tire. Lajo kene tingi kombashin. Kede chola tame sosor teta kede kombane. Tini nyangen de to drebi kyu kyushen kanyi tini shime gyus. Get chili at Dame Bangusum to talk with Shirib Jacom Chen, Dame Combina. Sosota de Kede Combane, Tombani Combane, Tini Yang de to Jebu Juice, Yang El Debatobe, Tungedi Zawache Nerva, when Yang El Deba, Yamu Pambe Yang de Tachum Bejabu Rasova, Tende Tobe Kuchi to Buresora. Kushen can eat in his shimmy, Tombani, Tobe Musumble, Shemba Shendagi, and Yamota on the Ponto Mares, Shesum sauce. Oh, this do not do matter.
No. So here we're going to just continue with the text for today. I know there was a question. We're going to address that next time, just so we have adequate time to take care of that question. So here, again, we're talking about the kind of quality of insight, of wisdom, in that, again, as it says from Unraveling the True Intention Arya Sutra, that our concentration can suppress the afflictions properly in a temporary kind of way, but the wisdom can thoroughly destroy their latencies. So it is this wisdom that is able to really extricate the root of our various afflictions. And so we can't remove our afflictions from their root. We can't get rid of all of our obscurations with insight alone. It's necessary that we develop this kind of insight, this special insight of a direct realization of selflessness, of emptiness. And so here, the king of meditative stabilization, Arya Sutra, also says, even if you meditate with single-pointed concentration, you will not destroy the misconception of a self, and your afflictions will disturb you again. So even if we are to have this kind of single-pointed kind of concentration, even if we develop this full serenity where we can remain single-pointedly focused, that's not going to get rid of the root of our afflictions, and therefore they will arise again. And so it says this is like Udrak's single-pointed meditation. So there is a story about someone who sort of wanted to like compete with the Buddha or show how long he could meditate. And so he engaged in this kind of single-pointed meditative concentration for an extremely long time, such that his hair actually grew out really long. And at one point he noticed like a mouse nibbling on his hair and got really angry. And so like all of a sudden he's created the causes to then go back and be born in a bad rebirth out of this anger that he generated. So although he could stay single-pointedly focused for a very long time, that did nothing to get rid of the root of the afflictions. And so when the selflessness of phenomena is examined discreetly and meditations are performed on the basis of that analysis, that is the cause of achieving the resultant liberation. No other cause can bring peace. So if we want to get out of this kind of suffering situation, the only kind of cause that can actually remove our suffering from its root, this ignorance from its root, is this wisdom directly realizing emptiness. So other than that, any sort of qualities of serenity and so forth are unable to achieve that. Therefore, this wisdom is indispensable. No other cause can bring peace. No,